The moment a sheriff's deputy locks the only bridge into your neighborhood, somebody has already lost a war they didn't realize they were fighting. The first thing I noticed that morning was the silence. Not complete silence. The kind of silence that settles in right before people start panicking. I was standing on the east bank of Willow Creek with a steaming paper cup of black coffee, warming my hands against the cool Texas dawn. A thin layer of fog hovered over the water, drifting beneath the steel beams of Mercer Bridge. The smell of wet earth and river mud mixed with the sharp scent of fresh coffee as the rising sun painted the sky orange behind the trees. Then came the horns, one after another, short impatient blasts at first, then longer ones, angry ones. By 7:15 a.m., a line of vehicles stretched nearly half a mile from the bridge entrance all the way into Willow Creek Estates. Parents trying to get kids to school, contractors heading to job sites, delivery drivers staring through windshields with growing frustration. Nobody was moving. Nobody could move. Two sheriff's deputies stood beside bright orange barricades positioned directly across the bridge entrance. Their patrol SUVs sat with emergency lights flashing silently in the morning haze. A large white sign had been bolted to the barricade overnight. Court order. Private bridge closed. No unauthorized access. I took another sip of coffee and watched the chaos unfold from across the river. That's when I heard her voice. Even from 200 yards away, Laura Whitmore was impossible to miss. The president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA stormed toward the deputies in a perfectly pressed white pantsuit that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. Her arms sliced through the air as she pointed at the barricades. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood, but I didn't need to. Her face said everything. Shock, anger, disbelief. The same woman who had laughed at me 6 months earlier now looked like someone had just informed her gravity was optional. A school bus rolled up behind the growing line of vehicles and stopped. Parents stepped out of SUVs. Phones appeared. People started recording. Questions spread faster than wildfire. Why was the bridge closed? Who authorized it? How long would it last? The answer to all three questions sat folded neatly inside the manila folder under my arm. The cool morning breeze rustled the papers as I shifted my grip. 2 years. That was how long I had waited for this moment. 2 years of warning letters, engineering reports, maintenance requests, legal notices. 2 years of being ignored by people who believed ownership was determined by popularity. Laura had spent those 2 years convincing everyone that Mercer Bridge belonged to the community. This morning the county was reminding her that feelings are not deeds. The deputy nearest the barricade adjusted his hat and calmly pointed toward the court notice. Laura's shoulders stiffened. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. Around her, residents began reading the sign for themselves. Some looked confused. Others looked nervous. A few looked directly toward the river and finally noticed me standing there. Watching. Waiting. Holding the same coffee I'd been sipping when the first deputy truck arrived before sunrise. And as the horns continued echoing across the water and the entire neighborhood realized they were trapped behind a bridge they didn't own, I knew something they didn't. This story didn't begin with a barricade. It began 40 years earlier when my father decided to build a bridge with his own hands. My name is Ethan Mercer, and long before anyone called it Willow Creek Estates, long before the matching mailboxes and homeowners association meetings and glossy real estate brochures, there was just a river and a piece of family land that my father refused to give up on. The smell of welding smoke and fresh-cut lumber was part of my childhood. Some kids grew up around baseball fields. I grew up around construction equipment. My father, Frank Mercer, was the kind of man who believed that if something needed to be built, you built it yourself. Back in 1984, Willow Creek was not much more than a stubborn stretch of water cutting through ranchland outside town. During heavy rain, it could turn a 10-minute drive into a 40-mile detour. Most people complained about it. My father studied it. I still remember standing beside him one summer afternoon, my boots sinking into the muddy riverbank, while cicadas screamed from the trees. The Texas heat felt heavy enough to bend steel. Dad wiped sweat from his forehead and stared across the water. Then he pointed toward the opposite bank. "One day there will be a bridge right there," he said. Everybody thought he was crazy. The county would not fund it. Investors laughed at him. A few neighbors said it could never be done. None of that mattered. For 2 years, every weekend became a construction project. The The sound of generators echoed across the valley. Truckloads of steel arrived covered in dust. Friends came to help. Family came to help. Sometimes complete strangers stopped by with sandwiches and cold drinks just because they admired what he was trying to do. Piece by piece, beam by beam, Mercer Bridge took shape above the water. By the time it opened, it was more than a bridge. It was proof that determination could accomplish things bureaucracy never would. The first vehicle to cross was Dad's old Ford pickup. I was sitting in the passenger seat, holding my breath as the tires rolled over the new steel deck. The bridge never moved an inch. Dad smiled the entire way across. That smile stayed with me for decades. Over the years, the bridge became part of everyday life. Ranchers used it. School buses crossed it. Emergency vehicles crossed it. Families crossed it. Then the city started expanding. Developers discovered the area. Open land disappeared beneath subdivisions. Within a few years, Willow Creek Estates emerged on the opposite side of the river. New houses appeared almost overnight. Hundreds of families moved in. Property values climbed. Streets were paved. Streetlights appeared. What never changed was the bridge. Every resident entering that neighborhood crossed the same structure my father had built with his own hands. The steel beams remained strong. The concrete footings remained solid. And the deed remained exactly where it had always been. In our family, that detail seemed obvious to me. Unfortunately, years later, certain people would begin acting as though ownership and convenience were the same thing. They were about to learn how expensive that misunderstanding could become. The first time I met Laura Whitmore, she was holding a tray of store-bought cookies and wearing a smile polished enough to belong in a real estate commercial. It was the annual Willow Creek Estates community picnic, one of those Saturday afternoons filled with folding chairs, country music playing through portable speakers, and neighbors pretending they all liked each other. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted across the park while children ran through sprinklers in the August heat. Laura introduced herself like a politician working a crowd. Firm handshake, perfect posture, friendly voice. She knew everyone's name before they finished introducing themselves. At first, I thought she was exactly what a neighborhood needed. Organized, involved, energetic. Looking back, that was probably what made her so effective. People rarely notice when control arrives wearing a smile. By then, she had already served 2 years on the HOA board. A year later, she became president. That was when things started changing. Slowly at first. Small decisions nobody questioned. New landscaping committees. New architectural reviews. New parking regulations. Every month brought another rule. Another form. Another approval process. Residents grumbled, but most complied. After all, the neighborhood looked clean. Property values kept rising. People convinced themselves the extra control was worth the convenience. Laura seemed to enjoy every minute of it. Her white SUV became a familiar sight throughout the subdivision. She was always inspecting something, measuring something, correcting someone. The strange part was how her authority seemed to grow beyond the neighborhood itself. Eventually, she stopped talking about Willow Creek Estates like it was a community and started talking about it like it was her community. I first noticed the shift during a board meeting 3 years ago. The meeting was held inside the clubhouse, a building that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. Residents filled metal folding chairs while board members sat behind a long table at the front of the room. A discussion came up about road maintenance and emergency access. Someone mentioned Mercer Bridge. Laura leaned forward and tapped her pen against the table. "Our bridge is one of the most important assets serving this community," she said. The words barely registered at first. Our bridge. Not the bridge. Not Mercer Bridge. Our bridge. I remember looking around the room. Nobody reacted. Nobody corrected her. The meeting moved on. But something about that phrase stayed with me. Over the following months, I heard it again. Then again. Community newsletters referred to the bridge as neighborhood infrastructure. Real estate advertisements described direct access through the community bridge. A local agent even told prospective buyers that the bridge was maintained for the benefit of all residents. Every time I heard it, the same feeling settled into my stomach. The feeling you get when somebody repeats a story often enough that they start believing it themselves. The bridge had become invisible through familiarity. Thousands of crossings had transformed private property into assumed property. People stopped asking who owned it because they crossed it every day. Laura understood that better than anyone. One afternoon, After a board meeting, I finally approached her in the clubhouse parking lot. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and hot asphalt. She stood beside her SUV reviewing paperwork. I casually mentioned that the bridge remained privately owned and maintained. She looked up from her folder and smiled. Not the friendly smile from years earlier. A different one. Colder. Calculated. Well, Ethan, she said, closing the folder with a soft snap. Without this community, that bridge would not be worth much, would it? Then she climbed into her vehicle and drove away. The dust from her tires hung in the afternoon sunlight long after she disappeared. That was the moment I realized she did not see ownership the way my father did. To Laura, usage created entitlement. Popularity created authority. And the more residents depended on Mercer Bridge, the more she convinced herself that dependence somehow transferred ownership. She was wrong. Neither of us knew it yet, but that misunderstanding was already setting the stage for everything that followed. The damage did not happen all at once. That would have been easier. Easier to prove. Easier to explain. Easier for people to care about. Instead, it happened the way most expensive problems happen, one small decision at a time. One overloaded truck. One ignored warning. One shortcut repeated often enough to become normal. As a civil engineer, I had spent more than 20 years studying structures. Steel talks if you know how to listen. Concrete talks too. Every crack tells a story. Every vibration means something. Mercer Bridge had carried traffic for decades without serious issues because my father built it with a healthy margin of safety. He understood something many developers forget. A structure is only as strong as the respect people show it. Around 4 years before the barricades appeared, I began noticing changes. The neighborhood was growing faster than anyone expected. New phases of construction expanded deeper into the property beyond Willow Creek Estates. More residents meant more vehicles, more deliveries, more contractors. The bridge never stopped working, but it started working harder. Early each morning, I would hear the low rumble of concrete trucks crossing before sunrise. The sound echoed through the steel beams and drifted across the river. Heavy landscaping equipment followed. Utility contractors followed after that. Some days I counted more than 200 crossings before lunch. Then came the development projects. Laura and the HOA board approved new community upgrades almost every season. Decorative entrance features, expanded recreation areas, new retention ponds, new playground equipment. Every improvement required construction traffic. Every construction vehicle used the same route. My route. My bridge. The first warning sign appeared during a routine inspection. I was kneeling beneath the western support span on a humid spring afternoon when I noticed a hairline crack developing near a connection plate. The smell of river water filled the air while insects buzzed around the foundation pilings. Most people would never have seen it. I saw it immediately. A month later, I found another. Then another. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dangerous. Yet. But the pattern concerned me. I documented everything. Photographs. Measurements. Load calculations. Traffic estimates. I sent a professional maintenance recommendation to the HOA board explaining that traffic volume had increased dramatically beyond the levels the bridge had originally supported. The response never came. I sent another report 6 months later. Again, nothing. Meanwhile, the traffic kept increasing. During one particularly busy summer, a contractor transporting landscaping stone crossed the bridge repeatedly with loads that exceeded recommended limits. Security cameras captured every trip. I forwarded the footage along with another engineering assessment. The silence that followed felt louder than any reply. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Laura sat at the front of the clubhouse while residents chatted over coffee and pastries. I presented updated inspection results showing accelerated wear patterns and recommending immediate discussions regarding future maintenance costs. The room listened politely. Laura smiled patiently. When I finished, she thanked me for my concern and suggested that the bridge had served the community for decades without issue. Several homeowners nodded. The discussion moved on to flower beds and parking permits. Just like that. Months later, during a detailed structural review, I found evidence that one of the primary support assemblies had experienced significant stress beyond normal aging. The repair estimates made my stomach tighten. I sat alone in my office staring at the numbers while rain tapped softly against the windows. The bridge could absolutely be repaired. The bridge could absolutely remain safe. But the cost would be enormous. By the time the engineers completed their full assessment, the projected repair bill had climbed to $380,000. I remember looking at the final report while the smell of printer ink filled the room. Outside, traffic continued crossing the bridge as if nothing had changed. Most of the neighborhood never noticed the problem. They certainly never imagined who would eventually be asked to pay for it. The HOA meeting where I delivered the bill smelled like burnt coffee and fresh paint. Someone had recently renovated the clubhouse conference room, and the scent still lingered in the air as residents filtered into their seats carrying paper cups and small plates of cookies. Outside, the evening sun reflected off parked vehicles lined neatly along the curb. Inside, people chatted about landscaping projects, holiday decorations, and property values. Nobody looked worried. Nobody expected bad news. Laura sat at the center of the board table wearing a navy blazer and the same confident expression she always carried into meetings. The room quieted once the agenda started. Budget updates, committee reports, pool maintenance. Everything moved exactly as planned until Laura reached the final section and asked whether any residents had additional business to discuss. I stood up carrying a thick binder. The sound of the metal chair legs scraping against the floor echoed through the room. Several people turned toward me. Laura smiled politely. "Go ahead, Ethan." I walked to the front and placed the binder on the presentation table. The weight of it landed with a dull thud. Years of inspections, traffic records, engineering reports, photographs, load analyses, maintenance recommendations. Every ignored warning sat inside that binder. I connected my laptop to the projector and displayed the first slide. A photograph of the bridge, then another, then close-up images showing areas of stress and deterioration. The room grew quieter with every slide. Residents leaned forward. Some exchanged concerned glances. I explained the findings carefully. No exaggeration, no drama, just facts. Increased traffic volume, accelerated wear, deferred maintenance. The consequences of years spent treating a private structure like public infrastructure. When I finished the engineering summary, I displayed the final page. The repair estimate, $380,000. The number filled the projection screen. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then someone near the back let out a low whistle. Another resident muttered something under his breath. Laura stared at the screen before slowly folding her hands together. "And what exactly are you asking for?" she said. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the edge underneath it. I explained that the bridge had absorbed years of heavy community-related traffic and that the HOA should participate in the repair costs. The documentation supporting that conclusion sat directly in front of them. Everything had been prepared professionally. Everything had been reviewed by licensed engineers. Everything was supported by evidence. Laura listened without interrupting. Then she smiled. The reaction surprised me. Not because she disagreed. People disagree all the time. What surprised me was how amused she seemed. She leaned back in her chair and laughed softly. A few board members joined her. Then a few homeowners. The laughter spread around the room like a wave. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Laura shook her head and tapped the estimate projected on the wall. "You cannot seriously expect this community to pay that," she said. More laughter followed. One board member joked that perhaps the bridge should start collecting tolls. Another suggested I submit the invoice to the river. The room erupted again. I stood there listening. The projector fan hummed quietly beside me. The smell of warm electronics drifted from the presentation equipment. My reports remained open on the table exactly where I had placed them. Nobody asked to review the engineering calculations. Nobody questioned the inspection results. Nobody challenged the evidence. They simply mocked the conclusion. Laura eventually raised a hand to quiet the room. Then she delivered the sentence that would ultimately cost her more than she realized. "The board rejects any responsibility for this request," she announced. "We will not be paying a single dollar." Several residents applauded. The motion passed without further discussion. Just like that. Years of warnings dismissed in less than 5 minutes. I gathered my binder, disconnected my laptop, and thanked everyone for their time. No argument. No raised voices. No threats. As I walked toward the exit, I could still hear people joking behind me. The evening air outside felt cooler than before. Crickets chirped from the grass near the parking lot. I stood beside my truck for a moment looking back at the clubhouse windows glowing in the darkness. Inside, they were celebrating a victory. What none of them understood was that the meeting had not ended the problem. It had simply created a record of their decision, and records have a way of becoming very important later. For nearly a month after that meeting, nothing happened. At least that is what everyone else thought. Laura continued running the HOA exactly as before. Community newsletters arrived on schedule. Board meetings continued. Residents mowed lawns, walked dogs, and crossed the bridge every day without giving it a second thought. Meanwhile, I went looking for answers. The repair bill had been rejected. That part was clear. What bothered me was something deeper. The confidence. The certainty. Laura acted like the community possessed permanent rights to the bridge. Not access. Not permission. Ownership-level confidence. I wanted to know why. The answer started inside a storage room behind my workshop. The room smelled like old paper, machine oil, and cedar wood. My father had kept decades of records in metal filing cabinets that had not been opened since his death. Most people would have thrown the boxes away years ago. My father never threw documents away. Every permit, every survey, every receipt, every legal agreement. He kept them all. One rainy Saturday afternoon, with thunder rolling softly outside and rain tapping against the roof, I started digging through the archives. Hours passed. Dust coated my hands. Old maps covered the workbench. Yellowed engineering sketches filled the floor. Then I found a steel lockbox hidden beneath a stack of bridge inspection reports. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. The label simply read Bridge Records. The metallic click of the lock opening sounded louder than it should have. Inside sat a collection of documents wrapped in a weathered manila folder. The paper felt brittle with age. I carefully unfolded the first sheet. Then another. Then another. My pulse quickened with every page. Easement agreements. Property surveys. County correspondence. Original construction approvals. Documents nobody had mentioned in decades. Documents I was fairly certain nobody inside the HOA had ever seen. One particular letter stopped me cold. Dated 1984. Signed by county officials. Attached to it was an access agreement between my father and neighboring landowners. I read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. The rain outside seemed to disappear. The room became completely silent except for the faint hum of the overhead light. The agreement granted temporary access rights across the bridge for surrounding properties under specific conditions. Temporary, not permanent. The distinction mattered more than most people realize. Even more important, the agreement contained expiration language tied to future development changes and maintenance obligations. Those obligations had never been updated, never renewed, never replaced. I spent the next week verifying everything. Surveyors reviewed the records. Title specialists reviewed the records. An attorney reviewed the records. Every conversation pushed me toward the same conclusion. The assumptions driving Willow Creek Estates were built on paperwork that no longer existed in the form people believed. The bridge remained private property. The access rights everyone took for granted were far more limited than anyone understood. Especially the HOA. Especially Laura. When my attorney Megan Foster finished reviewing the entire file, she removed her reading glasses and leaned back in her chair. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Sunlight reflected off stacks of legal folders surrounding her desk. She tapped the document with one finger and gave me a look I will never forget. "Ethan," she said, "this changes everything." I looked down at the folder resting between us. Suddenly the laughter from that HOA meeting sounded very different in my memory. The rejected bill, the jokes, the applause. All of it had been based on a dangerous assumption. They believed they were dealing with a frustrated bridge owner asking for money. What they were actually dealing with was a bridge owner holding paperwork capable of redefining the entire conversation. Most people imagine legal victories happen in courtrooms. They do not. Most of them happen in waiting. Waiting is where patience becomes a weapon. Waiting is where arrogant people convince themselves they have already won. 90 days. That was the deadline Megan and I chose. 90 days to give the HOA every opportunity to do the right thing. 90 days to build a record nobody could argue with later. The first letter went out by certified mail on a Monday morning. The envelope contained the engineering reports, the maintenance assessments, copies of the historical access documents, and a formal proposal to resolve the matter before legal action became necessary. Everything was professional. Everything was documented. Everything was calm. 2 weeks later, the response arrived. The letter was 3 pages long and smelled faintly of fresh printer ink when I opened it at my kitchen table. Outside, wind rustled through the trees lining the riverbank. Inside, the message was simple. Rejected. The HOA denied responsibility. The HOA disputed my conclusions. The HOA considered the matter closed. I remember reading the final paragraph twice. Then I placed the letter inside a folder and went back to work. No anger. No argument. Just another document. 30 days passed. Traffic continued crossing the bridge every morning. School buses, delivery vans, landscaping trailers, construction pickups. The steady hum of tires over steel echoed across the water exactly as it always had. Meanwhile, Megan filed additional notices. More documentation. More requests for discussion. Every communication was ignored or dismissed. At the next HOA meeting, Laura appeared more confident than ever. Neighbors later told me she openly joked about the situation. According to one resident, she referred to my letters as scare tactics. Another claimed she described the bridge issue as a nuisance complaint. What interested me most was not the mockery. It was the certainty. Laura behaved like someone who had never seriously reviewed the documents. That confidence became even more obvious around day 45. A new community newsletter arrived in mailboxes throughout the subdivision. The glossy pages promoted upcoming improvements, landscaping projects, and recreational upgrades. Buried near the middle was a section discussing transportation access, the neighborhood's access, the community's bridge. The language was subtle, but the message remained the same. Ownership through repetition. Assumption through familiarity. Every time they crossed the river, people became a little more convinced that the bridge belonged to them. Day 60 arrived, then 70, then 80. The summer heat settled heavily across the valley. Cicadas buzzed in the trees from sunrise until sunset. Every evening I sat on my porch overlooking the water and reviewed updates from Megan. The legal groundwork continued quietly in the background. Survey confirmations, property records, historical filings, county correspondence. Each piece fit together like another bolt tightening into place. Then came day 90. The final deadline expired at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. No payment, no negotiation, no meaningful response, just silence. I stood beside the river that evening watching the last sunlight reflect off the steel framework my father had built decades earlier. The bridge groaned softly beneath another stream of traffic heading home for dinner. The sound felt different now. Not strained, not damaged, patient, the same way I felt. A few minutes later my phone rang. Megan. I answered immediately. Her voice was calm, professional, precise. The deadlines have passed, she said. The record is complete. We are ready to move forward. Across the river, headlights flowed steadily into Willow Creek Estates. Families returned home completely unaware that the countdown had just reached 0. They believed tomorrow would look exactly like today. Laura believed it too. That was the funny part. After 90 days of warnings, evidence, and opportunities, she still thought this was about a bill. It had stopped being about a bill a long time ago. The county convoy arrived before sunrise. I watched the headlights emerge through the darkness while standing on the riverbank with a cup of coffee warming my hands against the cool morning air. The smell of damp grass drifted up from the water below. Somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird had already started singing. Deputy Ray Collins stepped out of the lead vehicle and nodded toward me. No speeches, no drama, just professionals doing their jobs. Within minutes, workers unloaded bright orange barricades and positioned them across the entrance. The metallic clank of steel legs hitting pavement echoed across the quiet valley. A second crew installed the court notice. Every document had been reviewed. Every authorization had been signed. Every procedure had been followed exactly as required. By 6:30, everything was in place. Then the first vehicle arrived. A delivery van slowed, stopped, and reversed. A pickup truck pulled up behind it. Then another vehicle. Then another. As the morning progressed, the line grew longer. Engines idled. Brake lights glowed red in the dawn haze. Drivers stepped out to read the notice. Some stared at it twice. Others pulled out phones and started making calls. Around 7 o'clock, the first school bus arrived. The driver climbed down, read the sign, and immediately contacted dispatch. Within minutes, parents began arriving. Confusion spread faster than traffic ever could. People wanted explanations. The notice provided one. Private property. Court order. restricted access. Every word had legal weight behind it. Then Laura arrived. Her white sport utility vehicle appeared at the end of the line before pushing forward as far as possible. She stepped out wearing sunglasses and carrying a folder under one arm. Even from a distance, I could see the frustration in the way she moved. She marched directly toward Deputy Collins and demanded answers. The deputy listened patiently before pointing toward the notice. Laura read it, then read it again. The color seemed to drain from her face. More residents gathered around her. Questions turned into arguments. Arguments turned into panic. Delivery services canceled routes. Contractors called clients. Maintenance crews turned around. Nobody had expected the bridge to become important until it stopped being available. That was the irony. For years, people treated it like public infrastructure because it was always there. The moment access disappeared, ownership suddenly mattered. Around mid-morning, Laura finally noticed me standing across the river. For a few seconds, we simply looked at each other. The distance between us was only a few hundred yards, but it felt much larger. She started walking toward the deputies again, speaking rapidly and pointing in my direction. Deputy Collins remained calm. Rules were rules. Court orders were court orders. By lunchtime, local news crews had arrived. Cameras recorded long lines of vehicles and residents gathering near the barricades. Reporters interviewed homeowners who admitted they had never questioned who owned the bridge. Others expressed frustration toward the HOA board for allowing the situation to reach this point. The story spread quickly. By afternoon, the same residents who had laughed during the meeting were demanding answers of their own. The bridge had not trapped them. Assumptions had. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the steel framework my father built decades earlier. The structure stood exactly where it always had. Unmoved. Unchanged. The only thing different was that everyone could finally see it clearly. For the first time in years, Mercer Bridge was no longer invisible. And neither was the truth. 6 weeks after the barricades went up, the settlement agreement was signed. I remember the exact morning because the air smelled like fresh rain and newly cut grass. The river moved quietly beneath the steel framework while sunlight reflected across the water in long golden streaks. After months of legal reviews, negotiations, engineering assessments, and public scrutiny, the HOA finally agreed to terms. The repair funding was approved. Long-term maintenance responsibilities were clearly defined. Future access rights were documented properly. Everything that should have happened years earlier was finally put into writing. The interesting part was not the agreement itself. It was what happened around it. Once residents learned the full story, attitudes changed quickly. People who had never questioned the situation started asking how the board had allowed it to reach that point. Meeting attendance doubled. Financial records were reviewed. Decisions that once passed without discussion suddenly faced scrutiny. The same homeowners who had laughed at the repair estimate now wanted explanations. Not from me. From the people who had dismissed every warning. Laura spent weeks trying to defend her decisions. According to neighbors, each explanation seemed to create more questions than answers. The confidence that once filled every room she entered slowly disappeared. By the end of the season, she resigned from her position as HOA President. No dramatic speech. No public confrontation. Just a brief announcement and a quiet departure from the board she had controlled for years. Life inside the neighborhood gradually returned to normal. School buses crossed the bridge again. Delivery drivers resumed their routes. Families returned to their routines. The difference was that everyone now understood something they had ignored for a very long time. Infrastructure does not maintain itself. Property rights do not disappear because they are inconvenient. And assumptions are not the same thing as ownership. The repair project began shortly afterward. For months, crews worked carefully across the structure. The familiar sounds of impact tools, generators, and welding equipment echoed through the valley much like they had when my father first built the bridge decades earlier. Sometimes I would stand nearby and watch. The smell of hot steel brought back memories I had not thought about in years. Memories of summer afternoons beside my father. Memories of blueprints spread across truck hoods. Memories of a man who believed that building something the right way mattered. One evening, after most of the work had been completed, I walked across the bridge alone. The sun was setting behind the trees, turning the river below into a ribbon of orange light. Fresh paint covered the railings. New structural components sat hidden beneath the deck. Everything felt solid beneath my boots. Halfway across, I stopped and rested my hand against the steel beam nearest the center span. The metal still carried the warmth of the day. For a moment, I could almost hear my father's voice explaining why every bolt mattered, why every document mattered, why details mattered. The bridge had connected people for 40 years. It still would. That had never been the problem. The problem was forgetting the difference between using something and owning it. As the last sunlight faded across the water, I looked toward the neighborhood on the far side of the river. Cars moved steadily across the bridge once again. Families headed home. Children laughed in distant backyards. Life continued exactly as it should. My father built that bridge to connect people. In the end, it took the law to remind everyone who owned it.